Fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. When you spoke with men there, and thanks for going there, because we touched on this before we started recording. But when you said the word crossroads, right, and you were talking about men, 40s and 50s, you said crossroads, I wrote down midlife crisis. Comment?
Yeah. I am hesitant to call it midlife crisis, and it's a great word. It's a chance. How I describe it for humans is it's a chance to take a look back at, the road traveled so far, to figure what you do well, what you don't do so well yet, what you like, who you like around you, and then to take that information, those learnings, and go, okay, so what about second half? How am I going to do this? And really to upgrade for the second half. So if that's a crisis, or if it takes a crisis for that to happen, happy days, although it's not necessarily pleasant when it's happening. But actually, in the same way for women, years ago, you may remember your mother or your grandmother calling it the change. It was a great word, because it is a time for change. If you're wise, you'll review and go, second half is, I'm in it. How am I going to live it? And so, yeah, it can be very exciting and really useful, and not just mean, fast cars and younger women.
That wasn't where I was going, but I hear you. I hear you. Hello there, and welcome to another Coffee with Colm, and thanks for joining. I'm delighted to tell you that this morning we're going to have a chat with Ashleigh Tobin, and delighted to have Ashleigh here. She and I are colleagues in the Professional Speaking Association of Ireland. So Ashleigh, you're very welcome. Thanks for popping in. Cheers us with your coffee mug. Say hello.
Good morning to you, and it is good to be here and good to be chatting today.
That's great to have you here. And come here, before we get into it, I'm fascinated by your backdrop there, right? Because it is so perfect that it looks like it's virtual, but you tell me it's not.
No, these are some of my favorite things in the world are my books. I am 59 this year. I was 59 this summer. So I'm of the pre-internet world, in the sense that when I wanted to learn something, you had to go to the library or go to the secondhand bookshop in Ranelagh. It was near where I lived when I was a student nurse. And I was able to find books on topics that really were really important to me. And one of the first ones that I bought secondhand in that bookshop, and I think I might still have it, was the Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway book, way back then. So these are my babies. I love my books. Hidden behind all the neat ones are more rows of books. And I keep telling myself I won't buy any more books, and it is a lie.
I said I was about to ask, do you actually lie to yourself often, saying that you're not going to buy any more books? Your babies are more than welcome to be here. It's lovely to see it. And level 59, I love that. Came across this thing years ago, that we're not getting older, we're just leveling up in the game of life. And it's a much more empowering way of looking at the world, in my opinion. But anyway, come here, it's lovely to have you here. Thanks for taking the time out. Tell us what you're doing now, and then we're going to go right back to see what started it all and what brought you to where you are. Please.
So my work life includes, I suppose, three streams, really. One is my one-to-one work with men and women, but mostly women, around, I suppose, a combination of health and head game. That's how I describe it. So particularly around hormonal health at every age and stage, but also around the head game that matters at every age and stage too, and how hormones can really play into how well we feel and how much we feel in charge of life. The second part of what I do is I work with organizations and corporates, really delivering very pragmatic, nurse-led and fun health sessions. Mostly we know exactly what we need to do. We just need a bit of a bum kick to do it. So I try and bring that very fun, practical and yet evidence-based wellness sessions into corporations. And the third part is sort of hobby, sort of work, which is my storytelling. And that's almost as dear to me as my books are. So that's really where my life in a work setting is set up.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so fun.
Well, it is fun, but it's also very clear. You're very clear on what you do. And by extension, you're very clear on what you don't do. And I like that. I think that's important for people to know who they are, what they're about, where they can be of best service, and then get on with it. But come here, we're meeting you now, level 59. And as I said to Brian Downs recently, with respect, you look like you have your shit together, right? So people meet you in the street or they meet you in a professional setting and thinking, God, she's got her life together, right? So can you take us back? What brought you into nursing? Is nursing the core discipline?
Yes, it is. So Fado, being in Ireland in the 1980s, of course, so I went into nursing age 17 and loved it, was good at it, enjoyed it, but it was a tough time in the health service back then, if you remember. I had always been, for as long as I could remember, interested in human behaviour and why people did things. And so I was interested in doing my psychiatry as a postgrad. But of course, things were so tight in the health service at that time that all postgrad training was paused for a few years. And it was during that time that I really began to get frustrated because I wasn't in the discipline that I wanted to be. And well, like most people in Ireland at the time, I didn't have a lot of money. And I remember thinking, I need to make a change. And so I decided, much to my father's horror, I left my permanent and pensionable job as a nurse and became a medical rep for a pharmaceutical company. He was horrified that I would do such a thing. And yet it was fabulous, an amazing start of 12 years working in the pharmaceutical industry. Across sales, marketing, and I ended up on the senior leadership team with Eli Lilly here in Ireland.
Wow.
Across a lot of different disciplines. 6 years of that was spent in mental health. And that was fascinating and aligned with what I was really interested in, which is how people can, I suppose, thrive regardless of the doo-doo that's going on in life. And let's face it, doo-doo goes on in life quite a bit for us. But alongside all of that, I never lost my interest, I suppose, in what I would call just whole well-being, because, you know, you mentioned to me before about the fact that when we have mental wellness, when we feel good in ourselves, or what I call when we have the feeling that we have our mojo, we can tackle life's curveballs, and life doesn't have to be great and well and calm, but we have more ability to be able to tackle it. So I began to study in the area of complementary medicine, and then some health challenges meant I was at one of those lovely life's crossroads where some big decisions were needed. And so I left the pharmaceutical industry, set up in my own business with a wellness and natural health clinic, and then began to see that we're funny things, humans. We can know what we're supposed to do, and yet we can get ourselves into a lot of trouble by not actually doing it. And so I began to see that some of the health stuff that I was seeing and helping people with were being made better or worse by people's habits. And so I became interested in that whole world of NLP, in coaching, in mind coaching. And so I went on to become Master NLP practitioner and a Satir mentoring and coaching specialist, and lots of others. I love learning, but I bring those tools to what I do because, well, you know that phrase, when the only thing you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. Everyone needs different tools and different resources depending on where they're at and what's going on for them. So
Yeah.
I'm very lucky. There's been several periods of big doo-doo in life, and yet somehow I managed to revert to that curiosity that I had as a child, and that has saved me. And I don't say that lightly. That curiosity and assuming that there must be a solution somewhere that has helped me hugely and makes it easy for me to love my work.
Well, look, it's very obvious, very obvious. Anybody who's just meeting you for the first time can see that you love your work. So that's wonderful. A couple of things you said there. You used the phrase whole well-being as opposed to holistic health. I found that an interesting turn of phrase. Is that deliberate? Is holistic being used too often? Is it a little too woo-woo?
So I love that you use that word, because I often describe myself as having a foot in both, the evidence-based conventional medicine and the woo-woo. A friend of mine created a little badge for me, and I'll show it to you. And it says, "I'm actually a witch." And there are words that we tend to bandy about a little bit, and one of them is holistic, and the other one is the other one is our self-care. We need to up our self-care, and they're all true words. But actually, what happens is we sort of delete them in some ways. We say them, we think they're true, but they don't have any real meaning in terms of our behaviors. I have a strapline I'll often put on the bottom of emails, which is, "Nothing changes until our behaviors do." And sometimes we can go through the motions of saying that we're going to do things or up our self-care or whatever, and it never actually makes it to real life, to going to bed earlier or drinking more water or getting up off the chair and walking. And so I like to be able to poke a little bit of fun and interrupt that trance that we can all be in sometimes.
It's interesting, isn't it? You're absolutely right. People's habits determine their future, but they perhaps want a different future, but they aren't willing to make the changes today and then allow time affect that change over time. The other one that you said, you just touched on your childhood. You mentioned it there in a brief moment. What was childhood like?
I was, I'm going to say, a quiet thinker, which wasn't necessarily hugely a great thing in Ireland in the 60s and 70s. My childhood was good. My parents worked really hard to make sure that we had everything we needed. They both gardened. We lived in the city in Kilkenny, but we had a garden. We helped in the garden lots, and so it was a very traditional house. I was very curious, but of course it wasn't necessarily a very safe place to be curious back then in Ireland. So it wasn't okay to ask questions about, I remember as a 7-year-old going into the church with my grandaunt one time and spotting that as they walked up the steps, all the men took off their hat and sort of put it into their pocket, and all the women fixed their mantillas on their head. And I remember thinking, who made that rule up? Why is it not the other way around? How come? But I figured my aunt was a wonderful woman. She was my first pen pal. She lived in West Cork, but I didn't think it was safe to ask her, because you didn't ask questions like that. So although I had a very lovely, safe childhood, it was quite confusing for me because I simply couldn't make sense of some of the rules that were in our society at the time. Which can be a lonely place inside the confines of your skull, is how I describe it.
And are you an only child?
No, not at all. I was the oldest.
Okay.
So when I wasn't in deep philosophical musings, I was helping out, and like most older children were back then, just doing secondary mammy roles, really.
It's fascinating. I remember those days. Because I'm level 61, right? So we grew up in the same era. And I remember Mum and Dad going to Mass. We all went to Mass, of course. And I said to somebody recently, I was born in Dublin to married parents, white. He worked outside the home. She didn't work outside the home. And I was raised Catholic. But of course, there was no possibility that anything else could have been other than that. And I came up with this concept that I think religion is largely geographically based, because if I'd been born in Baghdad in 1963, my life would be very different. My worldview would be very different. Now, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole here today, but it's just interesting to hear you raise it. I'm glad I asked the question, because where we are today, you and I, and anybody listen to this, the collective of all of our experiences over the years and our musings and our decisions that we've made, but it all stems from some element of, for sure, stems from our background, and that's really interesting. I love the fact that you've been eternally curious and you remain so. That's great. Feel the fear and do it anyway. Your first ever book, Susan Jeffers, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. That's correct.
Great book. Great book.
Well, I think what was fascinating for me was this idea that you didn't have to stay as you were. Because if you remember Ireland back there, you know, you knew your place and you stayed there. And so I remember on a pre-nursing course, I did my Leaving Cert when I was 16, and I had to do a pre-nursing course to be sort of old enough to go away. And the lecturer in this new topic called psychology that I hadn't encountered before had those acetates. I don't know if you remember the old overhead projector. And he put down what was Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And fireworks went off in my brain. That's the best description I have for it. I remember thinking, that explains so many of the questions I had. But I think what I was frustrated with in Ireland in the 80s in particular was that concept that, or certainly late 70s even, that you needed to stay the same. And so that book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyhow, helped me navigate my way from quiet, shy, really, very shy and unconfident young woman into somebody who could begin to shape her life. And you know, I'm big into the decisions we make and how they can lead us into the story that we're living. And so it was one of the first, I mean, it wasn't the first, but it was one of the first books that really helped me understand that by simply making decisions, believing a better story, and then taking action, we can start to shape and change who we are in the world and how we turn up in the world. So yeah, fascinating book, and just lovely to have tools such as books to be able to help ourselves, you know.
I think I fully agree with you. I think the single thing that I learned to do over the years that has transformed the way I think, because we are formed by those early years and our family backgrounds. You know, I was the first person in our family to break out of being an employee. My dad was an employee, his dad was an employee, his dad was an employee, and so on. And I broke the mold. But it took a lot of courage and it took a lot of reading. Reading was the one thing that I learned to do and created a habit around that gave me a worldview. You know, you can read somebody's biography in a couple of hours and you distill an entire lifetime of their learnings. And of course, they only put the stuff in that they learned in there. So it's a really great time sensitive way of growing, is by reading other people's work. And I can see behind you there with all those books, and by your own admission, there are layers behind that as well. So you've done a lot of reading. Happy days. I'm fascinated by the way you operate in the world and you know, what you bring to the world. And this season of Coffee with Colm is all about mental well-being. Sort of stumbled across it and realized, for now at least, I think this is what I'm invited by the universe to do, is ask questions, because somebody will listen to you, Ashleigh, and I could say the same words, but they'll hear it from you and they won't hear it from me. And that's what I'm fascinated by. Tell me, go back to the work you do today then, around mental well-being, largely with women, but sometimes with men, and in the corporate world, it's both, obviously. Talk to us a little more about that.
So, you know, the reality is that life for most of us has many challenges and lots of juggling and lots of competing demands. And so many of us now are are operating at max bandwidth quite a bit. There is not much wiggle room for anything other than full throttle. And it's wonderful when we have the health to do that. And even then, it's not a strategy that's going to work long term. And so what I see a lot is we have people saying phrases like, you talk about those words like self-care and holistic health, but you have people saying the phrase, oh, yeah, there's a lot going on at the moment. But it's been going on sometimes for several years for people. And we can delude ourselves a little that, once I get this project over the line, or once this sales cycle is over, or once the kids go back to school, or once we get to midterm, and we can delude ourselves with the story that somehow we'll do it differently later, or that we look after ourselves later. And that can work up until there's a crisis, and it's often health. We're vulnerable. I like to poke a little fun at myself and say, none of us are getting out of here alive, and our health is absolutely important to us, and our biggest vulnerability. We get sick. We're human. It's the human condition, and it can really take us out, and it can really take us out mentally as well. And in some ways, it's easier if a health crisis occurs. Lots of the people I work with, it will be a health crisis has occurred. And sometimes that's enough for us to recalibrate and go, okay, need to do things a little bit differently. But for many of us, we're slog horses. We'll keep going. Our bodies will keep going when perhaps there's health crisis going on inside the confines of our skull. And we're dealing with overwhelm or brain fog or insomnia or stress, or just a feeling of never being caught up with all that is going on in life. And it's miserable. It's miserable for people to be that way. And sometimes it's the pace we're working at. However, sometimes our physical health and our hormones can be at play. So I'm going to start with the men who might be listening. It's not talked about very much, but for men in their 40s and 50s, that change that happens in those 2 decades, which we know in a medical world as andropause with declining testosterone, that can have a real impact on mental clarity, on energy, it can be a time for crossroads, a re-examination of what matters. And it's not necessarily a bad thing at all, although if you're not aware that that's all that's happening, it can be challenging to process. And for women, from the age of 13, perhaps, hormones are influencing mood, motivation, well-being, energy, all of those things. So right through from PMS, PCOS, endometriosis, infertility and its treatments, and right up to perimenopause and menopause. Very often having a little bit of information about what's going on in your body and how you can support yourself at that time can make it easier to be mentally resilient and I call it just feel better, feel like yourself again.
Fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. When you spoke with men there, and thanks for going there, because we touched on this before we started recording, that women find you somewhat easier, as in they find you if they're in the space to find somebody to help them with whatever's going on. Women would more often than men find you. Not that men don't. But when you said the word crossroads, right, and you were talking about men 40s and 50s, you said crossroads, I wrote down midlife crisis. Comment?
Yeah. I am hesitant to call it midlife crisis, and it's a great word. It's a chance. How I describe it for humans is it's a chance to take a look back at, the road traveled so far, to figure what you do well, what you don't do so well yet, what you like, who you like around you, and then to take that information, those learnings, and go, okay, So what about second half? How am I going to do this? And really to upgrade for the second half. So if that's a crisis, or if it takes a crisis for that to happen, happy days, although it's not necessarily pleasant when it's happening. But actually, in the same way for women, years ago, you may remember your mother or your grandmother calling it the change. It was a great word, because it is a time for change. If you're wise, you'll review and go, second half is, I'm in it. How am I going to live it? And so, yeah, it can be very exciting and really useful, and not just mean, fast cars and younger women.
That wasn't where I was going, but I hear you. I hear you. No, it was just an interesting one. Get to a crossroads and you're asking yourself, well, what's life all about, and whatever. And people tend to make decisions or don't, and just continue with the status quo. And I think that in itself can be challenging later on. The other thing that you touched on, and you may not want to go here, but if I picked up on what you said earlier, you mentioned there were a couple of times in your life perhaps that you yourself had a health challenge and it influenced your journey. Are you happy to go there?
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, Lots of the clients I work with are that classic get stuff done person. They're the person that in every organization, that they always have the bandwidth. They are the person who will happily help out. They're the one who will stay late to get things done. They're the reliable workhorse in some ways. And the assumption is that they're grand. They're grand. Sure, they're always grand. You never see them in any other way. My tendencies would lean heavily towards that sort of personality. Not past tense. I need to keep my workaholic tendencies in check. That doesn't just happen in business owners, but also in a lot of middle to senior management. And so what I found, particularly when I was in senior management in the pharma world, was I burnt out. Put bluntly, I burnt out. I was really good at what I did, but I was working a lot. I had a young child. I was commuting from Wicklow into Dublin, and I just got to a stage where it's like, you know what, there's nothing left in the tank. And so that was one big health crisis that happened, because it wasn't just a physical burnout. It was you know what, yeah, I have no idea what I'm able for. And so very often, when I'm delivering sessions in the corporate world, I can see those men and women in the room. They're there. They're going to turn up. They're the ones with the smile who'll always be there for others. But they're often just a little empty inside because they're a bit burnt out. What actually turned out, though, was shortly after that, I had my wonderful daughter, age 30, when I was 35, and had some postnatal depression afterwards, which was managed very well, but meant that I was 37 before considering having more family. What followed then, which probably didn't help all of this burnout that happened, were that awful thing of a series of miscarriages, one after another, and then going into that world of, what became unexplained infertility, a very lonely place. And then the burnout happened. I left the pharma world, and over about 2 years, I went again and again back to the doctor saying, I think I might be in menopause. And way back then, it wasn't really discussed much. And I was far too young to be in menopause. Don't be daft, you're far too young to be in menopause. And of course, turned out I wasn't. But there was very little available. There was, HRT wasn't an option very much because of the report that had come out about its unsuitability at the time. And so there followed a lonely few years, I'm going to describe them, where I navigated finding solutions that would work for me, how I'd be able to feel like myself again, to manage symptoms and to manage the head game, because there's a there can be, I describe it as either, martyr mammy or mean girl head game that can happen, and that we can get stuck in either of them at that time. And so what was a tough time with physical symptoms and martyr mammy and mean girl going on led to the work that I do, an interest in hormonal health, and doing a lot of reading and a lot of exploring on what will work. And so it has come full circle now, of course, over the last few years, while I've been working in perimenopause and menopause, where people would come whispering to me saying, I think I might be. Now, of course, it's something that's discussed much more openly, and we have much more research, much more resources. And the one thing I'll always say to clients is that it's wonderful that we have HRT and that these topics are being discussed, but we must always remember that we need to be our own health ally, and we need to make sure that we're, eating well and sleeping enough and moving enough and doing the basics for ourselves. And then medicines like HRT or supplements or all of that other stuff can really make things even lovelier. But that's essentially why I'm doing this work, because of my own experience.
Well, thank you for going there. And I didn't know the extent of your journey. Thank you for going there. I do believe that by any of us sharing our vulnerabilities can help somebody out there who's experiencing something in the moment. So thank you very much for going there, Ashleigh. It explains a lot of the work you do now and why you're so good at it, why you're so interested in it, why you can speak so eloquently about it because of personal experience. And I think nothing would beat that. I'm sorry that you had to go through that experience, but it has clearly formed you, and you've decided to do something with it to better the world around you. You also said earlier about your work is in the area of health and headspace, and then you closed that circle very quickly because you brought us right there in terms of your own experience and the work you do. So I think it's wonderful, the work you do. Congratulations, and thank you for being of service to people.
Thank you so much. I am very open about my own health experiences, but also about where I screw up and how I slip up and mess up. There's Ireland, particularly the Ireland that I would have grown up in as a child, was steeped in shame. And sometimes we can, when we're not feeling so well, whether it's physically not well or mentally, emotionally not feeling well, we can assume it's something we're not doing right, or that we're not getting right, or that we're not doing enough. And that can sometimes mean that we'll feel ashamed, or that we're the only one. And that's an awfully lonely place to be. And if sharing my experiences and how we can overcome that helps people, happy days, because the reality is that we will all have seasons where we are feeling like we're in charge, and there are other times when things will be tougher. And humans are amazing. We're pretty great when we're able to have support and resources, and most importantly, when we have hope.
If you could offer one piece of advice to somebody out there who's listening to this and it's striking a chord, what might it be?
I would say reach out to me or to somebody else who will hear you. Humans are wired for connection. I'm highly introverted despite loving public speaking and all of that. So I need a lot of solitude. But I also need connection. Humans need connection. We need to know that someone is listening to us and that we can feel heard. So I would say reach out. There is a lot of information, support and resource out there to help you get through and overcome what you're going through. And to quote one of my brain health heroes, Owen Fitzpatrick, and to help you believe a better story for yourself.
That's lovely. That's lovely. But the essence of it is reach out, ask for help. And Brian Downs said that very recently on Coffee with Colm as well. Just reach out. Don't be fighting the battle alone. Motorbikes.
Yes. Yes. I don't ride a motorbike, but I do ride pillion on my husband Eric's motorbike. I am not a natural bike chick. You might have guessed from the order of my bookshelves that I have control issues. So, so, so I am not one of these lean in and it'll be grand sort of girls. And a little bit like the feel the fear and do it anyhow. It was one of those things that I wasn't sure I ever really wanted to, but I didn't want fear to stop me doing it. And so we now go on a lot of bike trips together. For those who aren't familiar with it, you know, we're all hooked up. We have comms between us. It's a nice way to share time. I mean, I'm not a speed merchant at all. I'm a wuss when it comes to that. My perfect bike ride is down country lanes where because I'm higher up, can get to see over the ditches into farmyards, and I make up stories about, I wonder what the family was that lived in that old ruin there. So it's where I create a lot of my stories, actually. But it's a lovely thing for us as a couple to do together. Megan is all grown and flown at this stage. And interestingly, as somebody who has those tendencies to be busy and to be productive a lot, your job as a pillion is to simply be there and not do anything else. So it is one of my most challenging and actually the most relaxing place I can be, because I can control nothing there other than my own head and where it goes. Yeah. So it's the perfect antidote to lots of my neurosis.
The absolute honesty in that, it's wonderful. I back in the day, as a teenager, we'd give each other crossbars or crossers, as we call it, And I was a terrible passenger. I'd cycle the bike all day, any day, and have anybody on the crossbar, but put me in a crossbar, not in control. What would Eric say? I'm curious. What would Eric say about your pillion skill sets?
He is aware of my, well, he was very aware of my nervousness, and he was hugely supportive in terms of setting that up well for myself. He always says I'm a great pillion. You're vulnerable on a bike, full stop. You're vulnerable on a motorbike. We are very aware, and you are riding defensively, as he would describe it, on a motorbike, so that you are seen more than anything else, because so many things can happen when you're not seen. But he would always call me a great pillion, and we have some little rules of engagement that we do, a little bit like life. We have these, I'm very conscious that he needs to be able to focus on what he's doing, so that's the priority. We know that it suits us to stop every 90 minutes or so, to get off, stretch the legs, have coffee, chat. And it reminds me, it's a little bit of a metaphor really for life. Know how you want the ride to be and what you need to set it up well. So leave him do his job, have plenty of breaks. Don't try to squash too much in. Make sure you see the ride, that you're not just getting from A to B. So lots of metaphor there for living life too.
I was just thinking exactly the same. Perfect way to end this episode of Coffee with Colm. Ashleigh, Tobin, stay where you are. I'm going to give you the last word in just a moment, if I may, but stay where you are. Oops. And thank you for being here today. So folks, you heard it here first. Thanks indeed for being part of Coffee with Colm. Hope and trust as ever you got something from today's session. I'm sure you did. Please consider what's been shared here today and apply it into your thinking for this next week, and then come back next week and we'll share another coffee together and have another chat with somebody and see where it leads us. In the meantime, get some great coffee for sure, get some fresh air, get some R&R. If you spend too much time alone, take some time and meet some people. If you spend too much time with people, take some time and meet yourself. Spend some time alone. And then when the time is right, and only when the time is right, get your head back in the game, get organized for the week ahead, get stuck in, make next week count, and we'll see you here this time next week for another Coffee with Colm. Sláinte. But Ashleigh, Tobin, last word to you.
None of us are getting out of here alive. make sure that your life includes things that make your heart sing. Go have a good one and look after the body that will get you from A to B.